With that, let's bring in our leadoff panel. Huma Abedein, top aide and longtime advisor for former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Frank Figliuzzi is here, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. And Ravi Agrawal, Editor-in-Chief at Foreign Policy and host of FP Live. Huma, I'm going to start with you. You know, tonight we are learning that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is actually heading back to Israel later this week. I believe it's on Friday. Now, the New York Times reports that this about the president. While he continues to declare unambiguous support for Israel, Mr. Biden and his top military and diplomatic officials have become more critical of Israel's response to the terrorist attacks and the unfolding humanitarian crisis. That's from the New York Times. So, Huma, how will Secretary Blinken's trip this time be different than when he went immediately after the October 7th attack?
You know, I think after the first trip, it was a response to the shock of the attack by Hamas, going in and expressing solidarity with the Israeli government and people, and obviously the victims and the hostages. And since then, in the 3 weeks since his last visit, you know, we had the visit by President Biden. And as you might remember, that trip had to be cut in short by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza. And so I think now things have shifted. The world has been watching for the last few weeks as the Israeli incursion and this humanitarian crisis. You've got UN agencies on a regular basis calling for more aid, urgent aid getting to Palestinian people. And I think today, in particular, I think one of the reasons they probably announced his trip today is seeing the images from the Jabalia explosion to say that they were targeting a particular Hamas leader and say that they had a successful hit, if you will, but at the same time seeing images of Palestinians pulling wreckage from the rubble. That is something that I think they have to talk to the Israeli government about. What is the plan for the attack? Because increasingly, I think we've already heard in the last couple of hours, the Saudi government has criticized that particular operation today. The Qatari foreign minister is saying this could undermine their mediation efforts. They've been helping to negotiate some of the hostage release. So it's really, it's a tricky balance. And frankly, they haven't announced other countries he's going to go to, but I am certain he is going to have to, and he will want to visit other leaders in the region because the support, the anger on the Arab streets, as we all know, is only going to increase with these images.
You know, Ravi, this just, I think, underscores how difficult this conflict could become for the Biden White House, does it not? I mean, the Israeli government is saying that this will be a long war. We are heading into an election year. Talk to me a little bit about the tightrope, because oftentimes what happens in foreign policy does not necessarily affect domestic affairs when it comes to elections, but this is an issue that is absolutely broken through.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, as Huma was saying, I mean, the Biden administration's stance has changed in recent days and weeks. On October 7th and immediately afterwards, it was a very clear sign of we stand with Israel, come what may. 9/11 has been invoked again and again. And that invocation, I think, of the last few days has become more poignant because as much as this was Israel's worst attack in its history, I think American officials are increasingly trying to point out to Israel that don't make the same mistakes America made after 9/11. America, after 9/11, essentially embarked on a war on terror, 2 wars in 2 countries, and it lost its standing internationally, which had an immense degradation for American soft power. And I think America wants to tell Israel to not repeat those same mistakes. In recent days, it's become clear that Israel's appetite for what it's willing to do because of, the horrific attacks of October 7, it is willing to lose a fair bit of soft power. That has ramifications for Israel. And as you were saying, it has ramifications for the United States as well, because if it is seen to support Israel, and if that support is blind, then in the rest of the world, America also tends to lose some support among its allies in the Muslim world. And then finally, you have how that plays out in domestic American politics in terms of, Muslim Americans We've talked about anti-Semitism. There is also Islamophobia to worry about on American campuses across this country. People are riled up. These are tense times. And it's really important in this visit for Secretary of State Blinken to try and calm tensions down, to try and, somehow let the Israelis know that there are ramifications to overstepping in the next few days.
So, Frank, Secretary Blinken is going to Israel, but here at home, as Ravi just alluded to, there have just been truly unsettling things happening all over this country, particularly on college campuses. When it comes to the Cornell case involving anti-Semitic threats against Jewish students, the suspect in that case is now in custody, is facing federal charges. He is a 21-year-old junior at the school. How do you see this war fueling future threats, and just what should people be looking out for? What else can schools and should institutions be doing?
Yeah, it was helpful, of course, that this young man confessed to the most vile and graphically detailed threats that were made to Cornell Jewish community students and faculty. I won't repeat all of them, but suffice to say that it's going to put him in prison. It's that level of detail plus his confession. So the message here is, look, the FBI is going to come down on you. You're going to get put in handcuffs for these kinds of hate-filled threats. We've got to listen to the FBI director today. I'm telling you, Symone, I'm fluent in FBI speak, and what we heard today was the strongest language used yet by an FBI director since the beginning of the war in Israel with Hamas. When you hear an FBI director use references like historic levels of threat, when he reminds us that both Al-Qaeda and ISIS have now called for attacks against the U.S. and the West, when he says this is a time for concern, and that multiple terror groups are now threatening Americans, it is time for us to be incredibly vigilant. He also, was not lost on him that on top of all of that, if not alarming enough, domestic violent extremists are seeking to exploit this time filled with hate and their anti-Semitism. He told us this startling fact that the Jewish Americans compose about 2.4% of our population, yet they're targeted in 60% of religious hate crimes here. So the actions by Israel today are likely to, not to get into the military strategy. I'm not a military strategist, but rather I am a national security contributor. So I can tell you we should expect an even greater increased threat in the days ahead. So college campuses are a hotbed right now. We have to protect the civil liberties, free speech, freedom of assembly, let people express themselves, but we also have to condemn hate, and we have to condemn terror. And the FBI, more than ever before, and DHS are working with campus law enforcement, state, local police, to really make sure that they've covered this like a blanket. It's a time, I'm telling you, of great challenge for law enforcement. Law enforcement has to get it right every single time. Threat actors only need to get it right once, so we're constantly playing catch up.
So, Frank, my one follow-up for you here is, how prepared is the FBI when it comes to tracking some of these outside groups like Hamas, right, and what they might try to do here in the United States? Because in the past few years, especially since January 6th, none during the Trump administration, the FBI did focus on more homegrown terror, white supremacists, some of the most terrible things that we've seen over the last couple of months. But this is now a different kind of threat.
Yeah, importantly, they can't take their eyes off the ball and focus overly on white supremacist threat. But here's the important emphasis today that Director Wray made. This is about inspiring terror here. So it's not that Hamas necessarily possesses any capability of any significance here at home. They never have. To hurt us here. But what he's concerned about is that all of these groups together calling for action are going to inspire violent individuals or small groups, he said, here. And that's incredibly hard. It's harder than monitoring the actual organizations themselves abroad, because you know how to get intel there. But the lone actor here is what concerns law enforcement, the inspired actor, the lone wolf, so to speak. And that is very challenging to get ahead of.
You know, as we had this conversation, I am thinking about just how this conflict is going. And Huma, I'm wondering about the hostages. Do you see negotiations to release, you know, the people still being held by Hamas in Gaza more difficult now?
You know, Symone, I just wanted to pick up very quickly on something Frank just said, because one of the things, I mean, the statistic about Jewish Americans is stunning for all of us. But I think just adding to that, we know that hate crimes against Muslims spiked in 2001, post 9/11, and then again in 2015 and 2016. And a very significant thing has changed and has added the burden on our law enforcement much more significantly, is we didn't have social media. We didn't have a lot of these videos, a lot of this proliferation of this hate speech, certainly not in 2001. And the trauma people had to go through, and then the acceleration in 2015, 2016, when obviously that kind of violent speech was being monitored on social media. And I remember very specifically, as somebody who was on that ISIS target list in the mid-2000s, to exactly Frank's point, it was one thing to be on ISIS's list, not, you know, law enforcement saying, well, we don't know that their capabilities actually to do anything in this country. It was actually inspiring bad intentions by, frankly, in my case, it was somebody who was in New Jersey. And so these are every single thing, to Frank's point, they can't get it wrong one time. And so it's incredible to see the work they're doing. In terms of the hostage negotiations, I think that's one of the reasons stop in Qatar and continuing to engage with the Qataris, who do have the relationship with Hamas, and to keep them at the table. It is going to be, to Ravi's point earlier, it is going to be incumbent upon Secretary Blinken really to take, you know, the tension down in a situation where it seems almost impossible to do it. But that's, frankly, the job of our Secretary of State, is to push through on diplomacy. And one of the things I am certain he is going to bring up with the Israelis, I had not caught this until a few hours ago, but the Israeli finance minister not transferring the tax revenues over to the Palestinian Authority. Anyone who's talking about a final two-state solution, which I know for many people seems like a pipe dream in this moment, has to be, for those of us who are optimists in the possibility of democracy and people having their own state and living in peace, both Israelis and Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority is that alternative. And so you have to think about all these conversations he's having simultaneously.
You are absolutely right. But I think that for so many people, it's just the weight of what is happening in these images coming out of Gaza, what the attack of October 7th, it is a two-state solution for some folks is far away, but we will continue to discuss it. Huma Abedein, Frank Figliuzzi, and Ravi Agrawal, thank you very, very much.